All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for the Northwest Consumer Law Center webinar series. My name is Amanda Martin, and I'm the Executive Director of the Northwest Consumer Law Center. We're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to advance economic justice. It is a pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Alyssa Au. Alyssa is a staff attorney at Northwest Consumer Law Center and our in-house auto fraud expert. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Please place yourself on mute during the presentation so everyone can hear our speaker. You'll find the mute button, which looks like a little microphone at the bottom of the Zoom. If you have questions during the presentation, put those in the chat box. We're going to be doing a live Q&A at the end of Alyssa's presentation. This session is being recorded and will be available to view on our website within a few days. And attending this webinar does not create an attorney-client relationship. This presentation will provide legal advice or legal information only. If you're seeking legal advice, you're more than welcome to contact us after this webinar, and we'll be posting information about how to get in touch with us at the end. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Alyssa.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for the very warm welcome. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our first auto fraud webinar of the year. This is actually an updated version of the one that we did earlier, I think perhaps 2 years ago, on how to buy a used car. That was before the pandemic. So we decided to update it because a lot of things have changed since the pandemic. Some things are the same, but there are some differences too. So that's what we're covering tonight. So today's presentation, just to put it out there in the beginning, what we are covering is how not to get scammed by dealerships. And we say specifically dealerships, not private sellers. As you can see below, we do not represent cases where buyers purchase vehicles from private sellers. So that includes Craigslist, that includes if you purchase on eBay. We are entirely focusing on car dealerships in this presentation. We are covering your rights as a buyer and also when to talk to an attorney. We are not covering what's the best price, model, and color of a car. That's something that you can probably contact your favorite uncle or cousin to talk about. I won't be giving any suggestions about what my favorite cars are right now. Like I said earlier, we're not covering how not to get scammed by private sellers, and we're not going to mention where best you should buy your car. Okay, so first tip. Know what you want and do your research beforehand. Car dealerships definitely can tell if you are looking around a dealership and don't know, and it looks like you don't know what you want. They will take advantage of that and tell you what you want. So to protect yourself against that, make sure you look into different websites to see what kind of car you want beforehand. Car value is really a really good place to start to make sure that you're not being overpriced or overcharged. Kelley Blue Book is fine as a standard, as one place to look. I like cargurus.com, and CarGurus is cool because it pulls from a lot of different dealerships to show you what the same car model, make and model would be priced differently at different dealerships. So I like that. That's actually where I found my car. And Google is great too. Google will show you a lot of different things. You should also do a VIN or title check. And for those who don't know, the VIN is the vehicle ID number. And each vehicle has a unique VIN number. So it's always good to check to see if that VIN number pops up in certain places. One place is the nicb.org VIN check. This is a national database that'll show you if your VIN number, if that vehicle has been if it's been reported as stolen, or if something else interesting has happened to that vehicle, that'll show up in that database. You could also check carsforsale.com to order a free car history report. I don't list Carfax for a good reason, and that's because I think Carfax is over relied on, and it is not a 100% guaranteed resource that you should trust. They get their information from insurance companies as well as dealerships, and both of those sources have reasons not to tell you the whole picture. So if a dealership offers a free Carfax, sure, that's great. That could be additional information that you could add to what you already have, but definitely don't rely on it. Tip number 2 is to know your boundaries. And I mean this especially because when you go into a dealership, you have to be able to say no. You have to be able to walk away and say, no, I will not agree to that. I'm going to walk away from this deal. That is where your power comes from as a buyer, your ability to negotiate and your ability to say no. So definitely get a good sense of what are your non-negotiables going in. I put some big ones here. Mileage is a really good one. It's a really good way to tell how much the car was used and if it's in good shape or not. 10,000 miles per year is the average, give or take, average for good use. So for example, 2015 Honda Civic has 67,000 miles. You know, is that good or bad mileage? So if we use that calculation, 2015, 7 years ago, so 70,000 miles is what we're looking at, and this is 67. Oh, so it's under, but it's pretty darn close. So, you know, you should know what you're getting into. This isn't a car that has really good mileage. It has about average mileage. So for a 5-year-old car, you know, take that into account and think about what the price is and if it's reasonable for a 5-year-old car. Add-ons is something that will show up a lot at dealerships. You will pitch it to you when you're signing the paperwork. Sometimes you won't notice it until you're looking at the paperwork, but they have all kinds of add-ons that they like to pitch. Sometimes it's actual parts like special functions, air conditioning. These days, people don't think of as special, they think of it as required. Backup cameras, Bluetooth connection, there's all heated seats, all sorts of special things, hardware in the car that you can add in. Those are, at the moment, I forgot what they're called, the things like the racks that go on top of the cars, all sorts of things. So just know to say no if you don't need them, because those things can add up really quickly and be very expensive. Aftermarket parts are things that you can get from the dealership, but you could also get it on your own, perhaps for cheaper. So just think about whether what they're offering you is something that you need to get there at the dealership, or if you're willing to get it somewhere else for possibly cheaper. You should also think about if you're using the vehicle for business or for performance use. By business, I mean if you're a Lyft driver, or if you're not even using it for Lyft, if you're using it for your own personal business, think about what you need for that purpose. I had a client once, a potential client who wanted to be a Lyft driver and bought a vehicle that didn't have trunk space that could fit suitcases. So that was not a good choice there. So definitely make sure the vehicle that you're purchasing works for what you want it to work for. I put in performance use there because sometimes people purchase vehicles because of its reputation. For example, a Subaru WRX has a reputation for being a really fun car to drive and race. So definitely know what you're getting into if that's what you're purchasing. Last but not least, I put the location of the dealership. This didn't used to be a problem before, but now that most things are online, a lot of people are buying things from far away. But there are things to think about when you do that. So first of all, if you buy something far from home, and what I mean is out of state or virtually, there are issues that can come up with that. For example, if you purchase a service contract, if that dealership doesn't have a network of dealers that you can stop by locally, well, then it's going to be pretty darn expensive, and it's going to rack up a lot of mileage every time you have to go in to get it serviced. And I mentioned their added mileage. There's also an issue with jurisdiction for disputes. So if something happens and it's the dealership's fault, you might have to sue the dealership where you bought it. So in Washington State, it's pretty common for a lot of buyers to go to Oregon because they don't have to pay the sales tax for really expensive purchases. So for cars and for things like big TVs, sometimes that's what people want to do. But the downside to that is that you would have to file the case in Oregon if it has to do with a dealership violation. So it's something to think about. I also mentioned virtual companies because there are a handful of virtual companies. I'll talk about them later as a post-COVID thing that has come up, but the jurisdiction, again, can depend on where they are based. So just know that there's a benefit to going to a dealership that you can get to easily. Tip number 3, know your power. I mentioned this in the beginning, but you can always walk away from a deal. The dealerships definitely take advantage of people that they can tell that are desperate, that just need a vehicle and don't really care much about what it is. Just know that you can always walk away, and that is where your power is going to be. I put user instincts. I've heard a lot of stories from clients that say like, oh, I should have left, or I knew I should have done this or that. And it's just like, just, it's okay. There's always another day to purchase a vehicle. If it doesn't feel right when you go in the first time, you can go again. It's totally fine. The dealership will still be there. The car might not be there, but you know what? You can find another car. So it's going to be okay. I put next, if they push back, they might be trying to hide something. That happens quite a bit, actually. So if you ask them, hey, can I see a Carfax, or can I see a vehicle maintenance report? And they say, oh, we don't have one, or, oh, we don't provide that, we won't give that to you. Well, then maybe you should wonder why not. Maybe they are hiding something. Or if they tell you, oh, we serviced this vehicle, this is what we did, well, there should be a record of it. If there's no record, then maybe they didn't. Maybe they're just telling you that. So definitely question things if they push you back on it. Another good one is test driving the vehicle. If they tell you not to do something, don't go on the highway, or they tell you, oh, you can't go down this place or this place. Well, then maybe wonder why. Maybe the vehicle isn't safe on the highway. I also put here, there will always be other cars. Like I said, this is actually an interesting fact because post-COVID, there actually aren't that many cars now, but take that into account when you're thinking about why you need the vehicle. I have here a handful of laws that I end up using a lot for my clients. The Unfair Motor Vehicle Practices Act is here to protect buyers who purchase vehicles at dealerships, and dealerships are required under this act to do a lot of things, like they have to sell you a safe vehicle. They have to make sure, some of the charges that show up on a contract are regulated. They're not allowed to deceive you and say things that aren't true. And then, it shows up differently in the vehicle when you actually get it. All sorts of things. It's great. The Consumer Protection Act is a very broad statute, but that can be combined as well. So that's there to protect you as a buyer. The Consumer Protection Act prohibits unfair and deceptive acts. So that's pretty broad, but that's to your benefit. And I have contract law there. Of course, each car purchase contract is different. But most of them are generally the same. However, the implied warranty of merchantability is something that's guaranteed by our state laws, actually. And that guarantees that a vehicle must be safe, and it also must be able to take you from point A to point B. So if it fails in either one of those things, then it's a breach of this contract law. So you have things that can protect you on your end as well. Okay, so tip number 4, get to know the vehicle. So once you're at the dealership, don't be shy. Definitely test drive it. It's always good to bring a friend because they can see things that you can't. While you're distracted you should not be distracted when you're driving. You should be focused and you should be driving safely. It's good to have your friend there next to you to look at all of the knobs and to make sure that everything works and that they also feel safe in the vehicle. So it's good to have another person there. You should also try to drive in different conditions. As I mentioned before, the freeway, drive in the city with a lot of stops and starts, drive on our hills. We have so many hills. You want to make sure that vehicle can handle anything. You should also try parallel parking. Sometimes you'll be surprised at, if you can't see a certain blind spot or something isn't what you expected when you hit the curb. Those are good ways of just checking to see, is this going to be a reasonable vehicle for your everyday use? Think about being like a kid in a candy store, just look at every single thing, look in the trunk, look in the knobs, look under the seats, just be very, very detailed when you're getting to know the vehicle. I put vehicle inspection here because a lot of people wonder, should you take the vehicle to your own mechanic? And the answer to that is yes, if you can. It doesn't hurt. Not a lot of people have time, or they're worried they don't have the money, but it is worth it to get a second opinion, because honestly, the dealership, they may have taken a look at it, but it doesn't hurt to get another person to take a look at it as well. If the dealership says, no, you can't take it to a mechanic, then that should be a big red flag that maybe they're hiding something. Maybe they don't want you to take it for some reason. Some dealerships will say, oh, we don't want you to take the car. Well, a lot of dealerships, if they allow you to test drive it, sometimes they might ask you to put down like a credit card, or put down not your ID because you need it to drive, but put down something of value to trade while you take the car to the mechanic, then you can take it back. So there are ways that dealerships do let you do this. So don't be shy in asking if you can. You could also ask for a proof of inspection if they say that they've inspected it themselves. Ask them for written proof of it so you can see exactly what they did. A lot of dealerships will just give it a once over, and by once over I mean they will walk around the car and they'll look inside the car to see if it looks okay. This doesn't mean that they opened the hood. It doesn't mean that they lifted the car on a rack. And those are really important things to do to make sure that the car there isn't a problem with the car engine or the car steering column, or anything that happens underneath the vehicle. The frame, for example. If the car has been in a crash, you might not see it when you look around the car, but you'll see the dents underneath. So that's definitely a good idea to be thorough when you talk to the salesperson about what they did when they looked at the vehicle. And I put right there, if there's no test drive available, again, big red flag, that probably not a good idea to get the vehicle, because you never know. You don't know what you're going to get. And I mean that specifically for online purchases too, because there's no way to test drive that vehicle. You have no idea where it comes from. Some people are still interested in that, but just know what you're getting yourself into. That's what I'll say about that. Tip number 5, know what as is means. This is something that will show up on virtually all car purchases I've seen lately will have a document that says you're purchasing it as is. So what does that mean? It means you're responsible for all the repairs and maintenance of the vehicle, right? So as is essentially is guaranteeing that you're gonna be in charge of fixing things if something goes wrong with the vehicle. It has to be clearly marked on the contracts if it's for specific parts. And by that, I mean, sometimes dealerships will say, oh, we'll guarantee, we'll fix your tires if something happens with the tires, or we'll fix the suspension if there's something wrong with that. So they'll put as is, and then they'll put, there'll be a second section that will say like except for, and then that's how the dealership can give a warranty for certain parts of the car. The law requires that this be a discussion with the dealer. So they're not allowed to just give you a document and not go over it with you and have you sign an as is disclaimer. You actually have to understand what you're signing for it to have value. The implied warranty of merchantability, again, warrants So it guarantees that a vehicle is fit for ordinary driving purposes. Again, it means a car has to be safe, and it should be and/or a car has to have its basic functions to move from point A to point B. You're not required to sign a waiver of this implied warranty. A lot of dealerships will ask you to sign one. So just make sure you ask questions and you make sure you understand what you're signing. And if a car dealership doesn't have you sign something like this, then you're still going to be protected by it. You don't give it up unless you knowingly give it up. Okay. Tip number 6, get to know the contract. And the contract can look really, really scary because it's a lot of pages and it's really small, but don't be scared of the contract and don't be scared of asking questions. You are responsible for reading the contract. You as a consenting adult are purchasing this very expensive item. So make sure you're taking responsibility for this choice that you've made and read the contract carefully. Check the odometer listing with the actual vehicle. And what I mean is look at the contract and see what number it has for the mileage, and then actually go and look at the car and see what is listed on the car, because the odometer is very important when you're reporting to the Department of Licensing. And it's also important to make sure that the dealership is selling you the right car and the car with the right condition that you agreed to. The Federal Truth in Lending disclosures is required. It's a federal law. It's also called TILA, T-I-L-A. It requires that the APR be disclosed and the total amount financed has to be disclosed. It requires a lot of other things, but just make sure that if you're financing a vehicle, that you understand exactly how much it will cost you long-term and monthly. Optional additions might show up here in the contract as well. Gap insurance is really popular. It's only useful if you owe more than the car is currently worth. Okay, and that might be hard to wrap your mind around. So I have an example here. So if, for example, you decide to finance a vehicle for $30,000 total, okay, and then you have a car crash. It could be 2 years in and you have a car crash, unfortunately. Your car insurance decides to pay the car's value, which is $20,000 at that point, because as soon as you drive off the lot, the value goes down. So the car insurance pays $20,000, but it turns out you still owe 24 on the car loan, just based on the interest rates or whatever. So GAP is supposed to cover that 24,000, the remainder that you still owe. Okay, so GAP really only makes sense if you're financing something for a really, really long time, more than 5 years, 10 years, 7 years, and you think there is a chance in that time span that you could get into an accident or a car crash and you wouldn't be able to pay the difference. That's the only occasion. If you're getting financing for 5 years or less, I would not recommend gap insurance. So just know what you're getting into with that product. You could always say no. You could always ask for it too. But most of my clients are just surprised when they see it on the contract. So definitely ask the dealership if you want a better understanding of what that is. There's also a service contract. Usually the dealership's trying to sell to you. There's benefits. There's pros, there's cons of having a service contract. Some people like the convenience of just knowing, oh, I could just go back to this dealership. I know where it is. I trust them. I like them. Some people would rather just, find their own mechanic. A lot of people have like family mechanic or a neighbor mechanic that's just down the street that they like and they know the owners. So it's something that you can decline. You don't have to agree to that either. And I have a sample page because you might be able to see here. I don't know if you see my mouse, but this says page 2 of 5 here. So these contracts can be a little lengthy, but I have a sample page here that you can take a look at to see what they kind of look like here. So this top one that I highlighted here is the documentary service fee. It's $150. This is actually something that is mentioned in the Unfair Motor Vehicle Practices Act. otherwise known as the Auto Fraud Act of Washington. And the law says that it's actually a negotiable fee. It is not required by the state of Washington. So that $150, if you want to push back on it, go ahead. And you can mention the law does not require them to charge that. So that is supposed to help them pay for printing papers. If they have to request paperwork from the Department of Licensing, that's supposed to be part of that as well. So just know that will show up, and the number will vary. I've seen it as low as 50. I've seen it as high as 200 or over 200 sometimes. So it's an easy way to save a few bucks. Another thing to notice here, I put down below government certificate of title fees, $493. So just know that they usually what dealerships do is they estimate how much it will cost to do the registration on their end. So when you purchase a car, the dealership is currently the owner of the car. To do the transfer, they need to talk to the Department of Licensing. So that requires some paperwork to be filed. That requires some registration fees to be exchanged. And in that time span, the $493 that you see here is how much they think it will cost. So they ask you to cover that up front in the beginning. But the truth of the matter is sometimes registration fees are not as much as they think they are. So they might actually owe you a reimbursement for the overage. So in the time span between when you purchase the vehicle and then you get your plates, if that's between that period, or probably right when you get your plates, is a good time to double check the paperwork and to see if they actually owe you money. Because I've seen very, very high estimates for this sometimes, like $500. That's a bit substantial. Registration fees can be pricey. It really depends on the vehicle, but I've seen some of my clients have gotten up to $200 back sometimes when they ask for it. So these are some things to keep an eye on. I don't have it highlighted here, but you can actually see, right, I don't know if, oh my gosh, sorry. I'm gonna go back. If you could see my mouse in the middle here, there's something, it says optional gap contract. And this particular person did not get the optional gap contract there, but you could see down below, they did get a service contract. So, all of these are optional things that you could say no to if you don't want. Okay, so the big changes. Okay, so the post-COVID changes to car sales. Car prices have gone up since the beginning of the pandemic, and it could be up to $3,000 over the MSRP, the manufacturer suggested retail price. That's a lot of money. And the reason for that is because there are chips and part shortages, and that has been a problem since the pandemic, and the car industry has not yet recovered from that. So that is still a problem going on now. It could take months for a new car to be available. And honestly, it's the cheaper vehicles that are harder to find. The base models are very hard to find right now. And it's because the manufacturers are putting the chips, they're putting all their money into the expensive cars. And I can say from my personal experience, I know someone who wanted a Tesla, and they were not able to get the base Tesla, but they were able to get the performance Tesla, which of course costs a lot more. But the really high-end nice cars are still available. So if you're in the market for a cheaper vehicle, that does make things a bit tough. It makes things more challenging. I put a note there that it is a seller's market right now. I could also say from personal testimony that almost every time I go back to my car dealership for maintenance, they always leave a little estimate for how much they would buy my car for. And it's getting pretty darn close to about where I purchased it for. So it is a great time to sell a vehicle right now. A lot of people aren't going to do that because they need their cars. But it's something to think about. If you're a multi-car family, maybe think about downsizing, because you could get a lot of value from that. But just know that if you're selling a car in order to get another car, just know that you're getting yourself into a very tricky situation because it might be a while before you find the right one. So just think about that. Your negotiating power comes from the ability to walk away. Again, that makes it tougher because you have less options now. It might be harder to walk away. So that's just something to think about. Think carefully because this is a very expensive, very serious purchase that you're going to be locked into for a long time. So just think about carefully if this is the right choice for you, if you really need a car right now, or if you can get by with friends or family or public transportation or any other ways to transport yourself. There's an FTC proposed rule right now. The FTC is a federal trade commission that proposed a rule to require dealerships to disclose the full price you would pay when a customer asks. That sounds like something that should already be required, but it's not. And the reason is when you purchase a car, they'll put in all those add-ins at the very end. And right now they're not required to tell you the actual price until afterward when they actually show you the paperwork. So there's a proposed rule right now that requires them to do that right up front. If you ask them how much will this car cost me if I walk out of here, then they have to tell you that. And to my knowledge, it doesn't include taxes, but I'll have to double check that. So I have this quote here, or it's not a quote, it's actually a title to a great article. I paid $3,000 of sticker price for my new car. You probably will too. It's a Time article, quite recent. So just know that these difficulties with the post-COVID car market is still happening right now. Okay, so when is a good time to talk to an attorney? Sooner rather than later for the SOL, and for SOL, that is statute of limitations. It could stand for something else as well, but in this case, it's statute of limitations. And the reason for that is for the Auto Fraud Act, the statute of limitations is 1 year, and it's 1 year from when the violation occurred. So if you find out later that something happened, something illegal or something that didn't seem right happened with the car purchase, you only have a year essentially from the purchase to let an attorney know about it and investigate it. So for the most important ones that you should be careful are the occasions if you purchase a vehicle and then a few days later or a couple weeks later the vehicle seizes and it can't be driven or breaks down in the middle of a highway. That's a good time to talk to an attorney. Like, don't wait any longer, because the longer you wait, the harder it is to prove that it was the dealership that was the cause of this and not something else that could have happened in months or you know, the months that and seasons that have passed by since you've purchased the vehicle. Contracts. I put the sale, that's the sale, the purchase contract is that's like where the contract is when you purchase a vehicle. I put warranties there. Again, I mentioned the implied warranty of merchantability. There's also service warranties if they guarantee a type of service in a contract. And then different types of auto fraud that you should be aware of. Yo-yo sales or bushing happens when you agree to purchase a vehicle for a certain amount. You sign all the paperwork, you drive away with the vehicle, and then in less than 4 days, well, actually the law requires that in 4 days, the dealership has to finalize the financing with the bank. So if the dealership if they're unable to do that, they have to call you back and get the car back and actually unwind the whole deal within the 4 days. So if for some reason after the 4 days, you get a call from the dealership and they're like, no, you need to come back. Something happened with the bank, or you need to come back. We need to talk to you. And then they give you a worser deal. Let's say the APR goes up by a lot. Your monthly payments are higher. It's a much more expensive vehicle. That is a bushing violation. Okay, that is a yo-yo sale, and they call it yo-yo because they string you out and then they pull you back in. So that's something to keep your eye on. Title issues are a big problem. That's a huge problem with the virtual companies. Specifically, Carvana is having a really big problem with that, and there's one more that I'm blanking on right now, but I'll probably remember it. later. But Carvana is a really big one. That's a problem where they will sell you a vehicle and you won't get the title, or they'll sell the same vehicle to multiple people. So you will not get the title, or you'll be lucky if you do. Normal dealerships like brick and mortar dealerships also do this too. I've had a client that purchased a vehicle that was reported stolen. So that caused issues, and that means that it's difficult or impossible to get a title if something like that happens. So that's something to be aware of as well. There are federal and state odometer laws. Odometer rollback, you might that might ring a bell, but essentially if a vehicle is reported as having a certain odometer number on paperwork, but that doesn't match what the actual vehicle shows, and you can prove it, and that might take some help from your attorney to help you figure out where to get the documents to show that. You might have a rollback case. And an example is I've had a case before where we were able to order state documents, because this is a vehicle that has been transferred from one state to another. I think it was originally purchased in the South in an auction, and then different dealerships bought it back and forth until it came to Washington State. But in those government documents from each of those departments of licensing, you could see the odometer numbers, and that's how we were able to find out that there was a rollback, that somewhere along the way, and hopefully not this dealership, but the dealership, when they purchased it, the numbers just did not quite align. So the numbers went down for some reason. That should never happen, because you can never undo mileage. So that's definitely something to pay attention to. And lastly, I put misrepresentation. This is kind of tough sometimes, because you have to be careful about what the dealership guarantees to you. And a lot of salesmen will put on the salesman hat and say, it's the best car ever, and like, this car has never been in an accident, or they'll say certain things that it doesn't hurt to ask, well, can you prove it, or where does it say that? Is there a document that I can look at to double check that claim? So misrepresentation can happen though, when after the purchase, after you drive the car home, something that the dealership said, for example, the dealership said the car would be safe, turns out the car isn't safe. If you get stalled in the middle of the road, that would be an example of misrepresentation. Another example that I've actually heard is a client, I wouldn't say a client, I would say a buyer purchased a vehicle at a dealership. They test drove the vehicle and then wanted to purchase that vehicle. And then they filled out the paperwork, but for some reason the vehicle wasn't available that same day. The dealership told them to come back the next day. So they come back the next day and they get a vehicle and they drive away, and they had this vehicle for quite some time, several months. And they find out from a mechanic that the vehicle that they had currently had a different VIN number than the one that they actually purchased. So all kinds of things can happen. Just double check your paperwork and make sure it matches your vehicle. But that is a type of misrepresentation as well. So Northwest Consumer Law Center is here for you for that particular occasion. If you qualify for our services, we can provide a free or paid consultation. Just depends. It's a case-by-case basis. Our staff does a great job of getting down your information to see if you qualify. We are technically legal aid, so we don't help everyone, but we do help a lot of people. So it doesn't hurt to ask and see if you qualify. If you don't qualify, we'll provide a referral. We have a lot of friends. We have other law firms that we like. We also have other organizations. So if you don't qualify for us, you might qualify for someone else. I should also mention that the paid consultation is another thing that we do. It depends, again, it's a case-by-case basis depending on whether we think we can actually help you. Sometimes the consultation fee can go towards your representation fee if you end up hiring us. So it's just a way for us to make sure that you have some skin in the game, that you're serious about your consultation, and that you've done some research and you're serious about this issue. If it's general advice, that will usually be free. Also, it might be paid if there are a lot of documents. So if you have a stack of documents that you want an attorney to take a look at, we might charge you a small fee for that, but it's still worth it. I put there, send us your documents. Again, this is how we, the attorney, me specifically, learns about your case. I love seeing copies of all the purchasing documents, everything, every single thing that you signed, all the contracts, all the warranties. That's a red flag too, by the way, if you don't get that. If the dealership doesn't give you the paperwork, then you should not leave the dealership until they give it to you. Communications with the dealer are great to look at as well. A lot of people these days have texts or emails, so that's really easy to send to me virtually. Obviously, phone calls, you can't record legally unless they consent to that. It's very uncommon that I get recordings. I have received recordings though, but any written communications with the dealership is very useful. I love seeing pictures before and after, and I mean before and after, that's if something happens to the vehicle that you can take a picture of. I've had a case where a car was on fire, which is a great picture to have. I had another occasion where it was a video. I believe it was a TikTok where the car was on fire, so that was also useful. So if you if anything happens, you should document as best as you can. And everyone has a cell phone these days. So, when something happens, take a picture, take a video, record it, and save it because it'll be useful later on. Estimates from mechanics are very, very important. And the reason for that is the mechanic is the first person usually to take a look at the car and to tell you how much that fix is going to cost. If you get multiple estimates, that's even better. Get that second opinion, because if you don't, I will ask you to, because usually the first mechanic, not that they get it wrong, but it's good to get a range. So if your first mechanic says they'll charge you $3,000 for the fix, the second mechanic says $1,500, then the value of it is probably somewhere in between, right? Perhaps the first place is overpriced. Perhaps the second place is underpriced. But it gives you a good idea of, okay, this is kind of the range of which it should cost. I also put receipts for repair. So if you pay anything out of pocket for a repair that you think the dealership should have paid for, then keep the receipt, because that's how we can keep track and that's how we can prove that the dealership should pay you back for that. And I don't mean save your receipts for things like gas, or if you replace the windshield wipers, those are kind of general maintenance. I mean, if you have to take your car into a repair shop to pay for a new tire suspension because your car is unstable when you're driving, that's something that you should say, because that's something that we can recover for you. Okay. So thank you very much for attending our auto fraud webinar. You could visit us at our website, nwclc.org. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. And those are our office hours. We are a hybrid office, so we do have in-person meetings, but they're case by case. We do a lot of things virtually these days because it's convenient for everyone. And there's our intake line number. You can also apply online. So if you go to our website, we also have an online form. So if you would like to speak to an attorney, or you're interested in seeing what value there is in your case, you're welcome to apply there as well. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, Alyssa, for that great presentation. I do not see any questions in the chat, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Again, thank you everyone so much for joining us tonight. If you do have any follow-up questions, you can get a hold of us at our website, nwclc.org. As Alyssa said, there's the intake link and more information and other auto fraud webinars if you're interested. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. Have a great night.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.